My stepsister made my life hell for 20 years. Now she's suing me for my house because I don't deserve it. My name is Rachel, I'm 31 now, and this whole story starts back when I was 9 years old. That was the year my mom married a man named Greg, and that's also when I got a new stepsister, Vanessa, who was just a year older than me. She was 10 at the time. From literally the very first day we met, Vanessa made it clear that I was not her family. She didn't try to hide it, she said it out loud in front of everyone during the wedding reception. I remember it so clearly because I was this nervous, hopeful little girl in a white dress, standing next to my mom and new stepdad, trying to smile for photos. And Vanessa? She looked at me and said, "Don't think you're my sister. You're not. You're just some girl my dad married into." People laughed awkwardly like it was a joke, but I knew she meant every word. That first year living together was brutal. She had this way of pretending to be sweet when adults were around, but the second we were alone, it was non-stop. She'd take my toys, break my crayons, tell lies about me to get me in trouble. Once she even poured orange juice all over my bed and told my mom I did it to get attention. I got grounded for that. Greg never really disciplined her. He'd just sigh and tell us to work it out. My mom tried at first, she really did, but over time it was like she gave up. I think she thought we'd just grow into each other and figure it out eventually. Spoiler, we didn't. Vanessa grew into this cold, perfect-looking teenager. She was smart, top of her class, athletic, and completely fake. To the outside world, she was the ideal daughter. But behind closed doors, she was cruel. Not in an obvious, screaming kind of way, she was calculated. She'd plant stuff in my backpack to make it look like I stole, or tell her dad that I was making fun of her when I literally wasn't even speaking to her. It was a constant war, and I couldn't win. By the time I was in high school, things hadn't improved. Vanessa was a senior when I was a junior. She had this huge group of friends, and she made it her mission to make sure I was excluded from everything. She spread rumors about me, told people I was obsessed with her, that I copied her style, that I was trying to be her. It got so bad that I started eating lunch in the art room just to avoid being around anyone. College was my escape. I got a scholarship out of state and left the second I could. I remember crying on the bus ride to the airport, not because I was sad, but because I finally felt free. My mom cried too, but she didn't really understand why I couldn't wait to go. Greg didn't even come to say goodbye. Vanessa was already off at her private university and probably didn't even notice I was gone. For a few years, I barely came home. Holidays were always tense. Vanessa would be there with her perfect grades and her smug little smile, acting like nothing had ever happened. She'd make backhanded comments like, "It's so nice you're still pursuing your little degree. Not everyone needs to go Ivy League to matter, I guess." My mom would shoot her a look, but Greg would chuckle like it was funny. I'd just sit there, silent, counting down the minutes until I could leave. Then came the engagement. Vanessa got engaged when I was 27. I was living on my own, working as a school counselor, and honestly doing okay. She sent me this formal invitation in the mail, no personal note, nothing. Just a card that said, "Vanessa and Aaron invite you to witness their union." Not my sister Rachel or family. Just my name, like I was some distant cousin. I wasn't going to go. I'd made peace with the fact that she didn't want me in her life, and I was okay with that. But my mom begged me. She said, "Please, Rachel. For me. Just show up, smile, and we'll get through it." So I went. Big mistake. At the rehearsal dinner, Vanessa made a speech. She thanked her bridesmaids, her parents, and then she said, "And to everyone who's stuck with me through everything, even the tough years with that little intruder in our house, you know who you are." People laughed. I sat there, blinking, trying to process what I just heard. My mom squeezed my hand under the table. Greg smiled. No one said anything. That night, I booked a hotel room and didn't go to the wedding. After that, I went low contact. I'd call my mom once a month, check in, but I didn't visit. I didn't attend holidays. I stopped pretending we were a normal family. Then, 2 years ago, my mom got sick. Cancer. It happened fast. One minute she was telling me she had a weird cough, the next she was calling from the hospital saying it was stage 4. I flew back immediately. Greg barely looked at me when I walked into the hospital room. Vanessa was there, holding Mom's hand like she was the perfect daughter. When I hugged my mom, she whispered, "I'm so glad you came." The weeks that followed were the worst of my life. Watching her fade away, knowing there wasn't anything I could do. Vanessa took control of everything: doctors, medications, paperwork. She didn't consult me once. When I tried to suggest something, she'd say, "We've got it covered." After my mom passed, I asked Greg if I could take some of her things. A photo album, a necklace she used to wear. He looked at me and said, Vanessa already went through everything. I said, "There's nothing left?" He shrugged. "You weren't really around much." That sentence hit me like a brick. I left that night and didn't go back. Since then, I've built my own life. I'm engaged now to someone kind, someone who actually listens. I haven't spoken to Greg or Vanessa in over a year. A few months ago, I got a letter in the mail from Vanessa. A handwritten note. She said she was sorry if things ever felt tense between us and that she hoped we could reconnect as sisters, now that Mom was gone. I didn't respond. Because there's no reconnecting with someone who never saw you as family. So, continuing from where I left off, I need to tell you more about what my life was actually like growing up with Vanessa. If I had to sum it up in one word, it would be hell. Not the dramatic, over-the-top kind you see in movies, but the quiet, constant, soul-crushing kind that eats away at you over time. From the outside, it probably looked like we were just two normal stepsisters figuring things out. But inside the house, and especially at school, it was a completely different reality. Vanessa didn't just ignore me or treat me like I was beneath her. She made it her mission to make sure I never felt comfortable anywhere. It started small, like her rolling her eyes every time I tried to talk, or sighing loudly when I sat down next to her. But it escalated fast. By the time I was in 5th grade and she was in 6th, she was already spreading rumors about me at school. Things like I wet the bed, or that I didn't wear deodorant, or that I was adopted and not really wanted. Kids can be cruel, and middle school is already brutal, but having your own sister, the one who lives in your house, be the ringleader of it all was something else entirely. She had this charisma that made people follow her. Even when she was mean, people laughed. They thought it was funny. They thought she was clever. I remember one day in 7th grade, I walked into the cafeteria and everyone at her table started mooing. Mooing like cows. I was barely 12 and had just started gaining a bit of weight during puberty. Vanessa sat there laughing, not even trying to hide it, saying loud enough for everyone to hear, "Careful, guys, Rachel might eat your food if you're not quick." I cried in the bathroom that day. I cried a lot that year. I'd lock myself in my room at night and stuff a towel under the door so no one could hear me. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she got to me, but sometimes it was too much. I'd ask my mom, "Why does she hate me so much?" And my mom would just sigh and say, "She'll change with time. Just be patient." But time didn't help. Vanessa didn't mellow out. If anything, she got more sophisticated with her cruelty. She started gaslighting me. Telling me I was too sensitive, that no one liked me because I was weird, that Mom only loved me because she had to. She'd, accidentally, tell the younger kids in the family that I wasn't really their sister. I remember her telling our little brother when he was 5, "You know Rachel's not really your sister, right? She's just our mom's kid, not dad's." He looked so confused and sad. I pulled him aside afterward and tried to explain it in a way that wouldn't hurt him, but the damage was already done. She'd whisper things to them when she thought I wasn't listening. "She's not one of us. She doesn't belong here." And the worst part? They started to believe her. My own half-siblings started distancing themselves from me. They wouldn't come to me for help with homework anymore. They wouldn't sit next to me on the couch. At family dinners, I'd try to join the conversation and they'd go quiet or pretend they didn't hear me. I tried to tell my stepdad once. I remember sitting at the kitchen table while he read the newspaper and I said, "Greg, Vanessa's being really mean to me again. She's telling the kids I'm not part of the family." He didn't even look up. He just said, "She'll grow out of it, Rachel. Don't let it get to you." But how could I not? I was being torn apart inside my own home. There was nowhere to escape from it. School wasn't safe. Home wasn't safe. I felt completely alone. My mom wasn't cruel, but she was passive. She'd tell me to ignore it, tell me that sisters fight, that it would get better. But it never did. It just changed forms. When we were teenagers, Vanessa got more subtle. She'd steal my clothes and return them stained or stretched out. She'd take my phone and go through my messages, then tease me for what she read. She once found a diary entry I wrote about a boy I liked and read it out loud to a group of her friends at a sleepover. They laughed like it was the funniest thing ever, and when I walked in and saw what was happening, I turned around and ran to my room. Afterward, she acted like it was no big deal. "You shouldn't have written it if you didn't want someone to read it," she said. I was 14. I didn't know how to defend myself from that kind of attack. I started second-guessing everything I did. Was I being too emotional? Was I too sensitive? Was it my fault? I didn't have the words for it back then, but now I know what it was: emotional abuse. That constant erosion of my confidence, the way she made me feel like I didn't matter, like I didn't belong. The way she convinced other people to see me through her lens. Less than, weird, annoying, unwanted. That wasn't just normal sibling rivalry. That was something darker, and the worst part is, no one around me wanted to acknowledge it. If there was ever a moment that made things crystal clear for me, it was when Vanessa had her first child. She was 17, I was 16, and we were both still living under the same roof, barely speaking unless we had to. The dynamic had shifted a little by then, less open warfare, more silent distance. We'd both grown older, and maybe part of me thought that age would soften her, make her more understanding, more human. I couldn't have been more wrong. She got pregnant sometime during her junior year of high school, and the whole house was buzzing with tension the day she told our parents. My stepdad, Greg, looked completely blindsided. My mom was quiet, pale, and holding back tears. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked smug, like she had somehow won something. I stood off to the side, not really knowing what to feel. It wasn't like we were close anymore, but we still shared a home, a school, a history. As the months passed, I tried to keep my distance. Vanessa was moody and snappish. She would roll her eyes if I so much as walked into the room. She spent most of her time holed up in her bedroom or out with the father of the baby, a guy named Marcus who had already dropped out of school and was working nights at a tire shop. No one really talked about him. Everything felt like it was being held together with duct tape and denial. Then the baby came. I remember the exact day. It was early morning, cold and gray outside. Greg burst into my room without knocking and said, "Vanessa's in labor. Watch the kids, we're going to the hospital." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just a command. I spent the entire day keeping my younger half-siblings fed and distracted, trying not to think about what was going on at the hospital, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this would be a turning point for us. Maybe becoming a mother would change her. Maybe she'd finally understand what it means to care about someone other than herself. When they came home the next day, Vanessa looked exhausted but proud. She held the baby close, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, and didn't even look in my direction. My mom cried when she saw the baby. Greg kept taking pictures. I hovered in the background, unsure of what to do. I didn't expect some grand moment of bonding, but I thought maybe I could at least say hello. But I didn't even get that. The first time I asked to hold the baby, Vanessa didn't even respond. She turned her back and walked into the bedroom. The second time I asked, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're not touching my child." Just like that. No explanation, no softening. I stood there, stunned, not knowing what to say. My mom gave me a helpless look, like she didn't want to get involved. Greg avoided eye contact entirely. That's when it clicked for me. There was never going to be a turning point. There wasn't going to be healing or maturity or some big reconciliation. Vanessa didn't see me as family. She never had. And nothing, not time, not shared memories, not even the birth of her child, was going to change that. From that day forward, she stopped speaking to me completely. Not even out of anger, just indifference. Like I didn't exist. She moved out of the house 2 months later, and went to live with her biological mother across town. It wasn't some big dramatic exit. She packed up her things, loaded the baby into Marcus's truck, and left. I wasn't even home when it happened. I found out from my mom later that evening. She told me over dinner like she was talking about the weather. After that, I only saw Vanessa on holidays. She'd show up to Thanksgiving or Christmas with the baby in tow, acting like a guest, not a sister. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was cold and clipped. I never held the baby. I was never invited to birthday parties, never asked to babysit, never included in anything. She kept that part of her life locked away, and I was clearly not welcome in it. That was the moment it stopped being a fight and became a breakup. Not the kind you have with a partner, but the kind you have with someone you spent your whole childhood trying to be close to. I stopped trying after that. I stopped hoping. And honestly, there was a strange sort of peace in finally letting go of something that had only ever hurt me. So, after more than a decade of near-total silence, I got a phone call I never expected. It was early evening, sometime in January, and I had just finished making dinner when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me said to pick it up. When I answered, I heard my mother's voice on the other end. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not really. There had been a few forced holiday greetings here and there, but nothing that resembled a real conversation. Her voice sounded tired, almost uncertain, as she said, "Hi, Rachel. I know it's been a long time, but I need to talk to you about something important." I stood in my kitchen, frozen, holding the phone to my ear, barely able to process what was happening. After a pause, she said, "It's about Vanessa." I didn't say anything. I just waited. She went on to explain that Vanessa had lost her job. Something about the company downsizing, followed by a few missed rent payments, then eviction. And apparently Marcus, the same guy from back in high school, was out of the picture. Again. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need the details. The part that really hit me was what came next. She has 5 kids now, my mom said, almost like she was waiting for me to react. I didn't. She's staying with us temporarily. But it's not working. There just isn't enough space here. That's when she dropped it. She was wondering. Well, we were wondering if maybe you could let her and the kids stay at your house, just for a little while, until she gets back on her feet. And you could move back in here. We've made some changes. Your old room's still here. I didn't know what to say. I thought maybe I misheard. I asked her to repeat it. And she did, word for word, like it made perfect sense. They wanted me to hand over my house, the one I had saved up for, worked for, built my peace in, and go live back in the same house where I spent years being ignored, belittled, and pushed aside. They wanted me to step aside for Vanessa. Again. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell or curse. I just asked her, why would you think I'd agree to that? There was a pause, long enough that I could hear her breathing on the other end. Then she said, because you're doing well, Rachel. You have a good job, a home, your life is stable. Vanessa isn't as lucky. I was stunned. All those years of silence, all those holidays spent on opposite sides of the room, and now suddenly I was the responsible one. The stable one. The one they could ask for help. Not once did she acknowledge the way Vanessa treated me. Not once did she mention the years of emotional abuse, the cold rejection, the humiliation. It was like none of that had ever happened. All that mattered now was that Vanessa needed help, and I had something they wanted. I asked her again, you really think it's fair to ask me to give up my home for someone who never saw me as family? Who wouldn't even let me hold her baby? She didn't answer. Instead, she said, she's changed, Rachel. She's been through a lot. Maybe this is a chance to fix things. I said no. Firmly, clearly, without apology. I told her I wasn't moving out of my home. I told her they could figure something else out. There were shelters, programs, government aid. Vanessa wasn't my responsibility. She didn't take it well. Her voice got sharp, accusing. I thought you'd grown up. I thought you were better than this. And just like that, the call was over. I stared at my phone for a long time after that, feeling this strange mix of anger and disbelief. After all this time, after everything I went through, they still expected me to be the one who bent, the one who gave, the one who sacrificed. So, after that ridiculous phone call from my mother asking me to give my house to Vanessa and move back into their place, I thought that was the end of it. I had made myself clear. I had said no. I was done bending over backwards for people who never treated me like family. But of course, it didn't end there. A few days later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It just said, we need to talk. It's important. I ignored it. Then another message came in. It's Vanessa. I know what Mom asked. I need to speak to you directly. Against my better judgment, I agreed to a phone call. I figured maybe she had finally come to her senses, maybe she wanted to apologize, maybe, stupidly, I hoped for some scrap of closure. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. She didn't even say hello before launching into it. So you're seriously not going to help us? You're really going to leave your nieces and nephews on the street? I stayed calm and told her, I'm not giving up my home, Vanessa. I built my life from scratch after everything I went through, and I'm finally in a place where I feel safe. I'm not going to destroy that to accommodate someone who's treated me like trash for most of my life. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A bitter, ugly one. Wow. You really are heartless. You live alone in a house worth what, 700 grand? And you're what, 31? No kids. No responsibilities. What do you even need all that space for? I didn't answer. I didn't feel like explaining myself. She kept going. You're selfish. You always have been. You think just because you make some money now and got lucky in life that you're better than the rest of us. You're not. You're still the weird little outsider no one wanted around. I stayed quiet for a second, then told her, this conversation is over. Don't contact me again. She snapped, you'll regret this. Family is everything, Rachel. And when you need us, don't bother coming back. Because we won't be there. I hung up. That night, I sat in my living room in my house, the one I worked years for, the one I poured every late night, every sacrifice, every setback into, and I felt something I didn't expect, relief. So, just when I thought everything was done, when I thought that phone call was the last straw and that Vanessa had finally accepted my answer, a few weeks later, I came home from work and saw something that made my stomach drop. There she was, Vanessa, standing on my front porch with 5 kids of varying ages, several worn-out suitcases, and a look on her face that wasn't hopeful or embarrassed or even desperate. No. It was expectant. Like she had already decided how this was going to go. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. Her youngest, a toddler, was crying. One of the older boys was chasing the twins around my walkway. Her middle daughter sat on a suitcase, looking completely uninterested in everything going on. And Vanessa? She was texting on her phone like she had all the time in the world. I got out of the car and approached slowly, still trying to convince myself that I was misunderstanding the situation. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She didn't even look up from her phone. "We're moving in," she said, casually, like it was a decision that had already been agreed upon. "You didn't give us an actual address when we talked, but Mom told me where you live." I blinked, stunned. "You can't be serious." She looked at me then, eyebrows raised, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "I have nowhere else to go, Rachel. The kids need a place. I'm not asking anymore. We're staying." I shook my head, already feeling my pulse start to rise. "No, you're not." I said no. "You don't get to show up here and dump yourself and your children on my doorstep after everything you've done." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "God, you're unbelievable. What kind of woman turns away children? Your own nieces and nephews? Do you have any idea what it's like trying to keep 5 kids in a one-bedroom apartment? This isn't about you." I stood my ground. "It's exactly about me. This is my home. I worked for it. I sacrificed for it. And you think you can just show up here and force your way in because you made bad choices and want someone else to clean it up?" Her face changed then. She dropped the smugness, but not for humility. No, for fury. "You always thought you were better than everyone. But you're just bitter and alone. Enjoy your big empty house while 5 kids sleep in a car, you selfish bitch." I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I didn't get emotional. I said, "Leave. Now. Or I'm calling the police." She stood there for a moment, like she was trying to decide if I was bluffing. But I wasn't. I unlocked the front door and walked inside without another word. I watched through the peephole as she ranted at her kids to gather their stuff, shoving bags into the trunk, yelling about how the world was against her. Then she drove off. That was the last time I saw her. So, after Vanessa showed up at my house with her kids and I refused to let her move in, I figured that would be the end of it. I had been firm. I had made it crystal clear that I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. But of course, she wasn't finished. She did what she's always done when things don't go her way. She turned the story around to make herself the victim. But this time, she didn't just complain to our parents. She went on a full-blown smear campaign, calling everyone she could think of from Greg's side of the family. That included his sisters, his cousins, old family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. People I barely knew were suddenly calling and texting, acting like I had committed some kind of moral crime. It started slowly at first. A voicemail from Aunt Brenda saying she was disappointed in me. A message from Cousin Melissa saying she didn't understand how I could turn my back on family, especially children. Then it picked up speed. One day I got 6 calls in a row, all from different numbers. I answered one, thinking it might be something important, and it was some distant relative, someone I hadn't seen since I was maybe 12, saying I needed to do the right thing and open my heart. Apparently, Vanessa had told everyone that I had a mansion to myself and refused to help my struggling sister and her 5 children. She told them I slammed the door in her face, refused to let her even come inside, and told her that I didn't care if her kids had nowhere to sleep. She painted this picture of me as cold, selfish, bitter, and cruel. And the worst part? They believed her. People who never once checked in on me. People who never asked how I was doing after I moved out. People who never acknowledged the years of bullying, the humiliation, the absolute silence I endured from Vanessa growing up. Now they were all crawling out of the woodwork to tell me what kind of person I should be. I got messages like, "Family helps each other, even when it's hard." Or, "You're lucky enough to have more than you need. Why not share it?" One relative actually said, "Vanessa's just struggling. You don't have kids. You wouldn't understand." It was endless. At first, I ignored them. But then I realized that silence was being interpreted as guilt. So I started answering, calmly and directly. I didn't go into detail, I didn't defend myself with stories or evidence. I just said the same thing every time. Vanessa has chosen her own path, and she has to cope with it on her own. Some hung up on me. Some kept arguing. But I didn't change my stance. Because this wasn't about a one-time mistake or a rough patch. This was about a lifetime of choices. Vanessa made it clear, over and over again, that I wasn't her family. Now suddenly, I'm supposed to hand over everything I've built just because she needs it? No. That's not how it works. So I stayed firm. And when the messages and calls kept coming, I blocked them one by one. So, after the calls from relatives started to die down and things seemed to settle for a few weeks, I honestly thought the worst of it was over. I figured Vanessa had finally realized that she wasn't going to get what she wanted, and that maybe, just maybe, she'd stop trying to force her way into my life. I was wrong. One Monday morning, I checked my mailbox and found a thick envelope addressed to me. At first, I thought it might be something work-related or financial. But when I opened it and saw the legal header across the top of the first page, I froze. It was a formal notice. Vanessa had filed a lawsuit against me. She was actually trying to take me to court. At first, I thought it had to be a joke, some kind of prank or bluff. But no, it was real. She had filed an official legal complaint, claiming I had an ethical and familial obligation to provide housing for her and her 5 children. She even referenced the fact that I lived alone in a large and spacious home while her children were in unstable and distressing living conditions. She was trying to make it sound like I was violating some kind of moral law, and she wanted the court to do something about it. I was in shock. After the disbelief wore off, I got angry. I knew Vanessa had always been manipulative, but this was another level entirely. So I called a lawyer. I explained the situation, handed over all the paperwork, and sat through a consultation that honestly felt surreal. My attorney flipped through the pages and looked up at me, eyebrows raised. "This is one of the most ridiculous filings I've ever seen," she said. "But we're going to take it seriously." We went to court a few weeks later. I had never set foot in a courtroom before, but there I was, sitting across from my half-sister while she tried to convince a judge that she was entitled to my house. She brought one of her kids with her, probably to tug on the court's emotions. Her face was composed, calm, like she really believed she was in the right. My lawyer went through everything. My ownership of the home, the lack of any legal or financial obligation, the complete absence of any precedent for what Vanessa was asking. The judge listened patiently, flipping through the documents, occasionally nodding, occasionally frowning. Then, finally, the judge looked directly at Vanessa and asked, "Can you explain why you think you have the right to your sister's house?" There was a long pause. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She shifted in her seat and said, "Because she has more than enough. And I have children." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That's not a legal argument." Vanessa tried again, more flustered this time. "She's my sister. She's supposed to help me. We're family. She doesn't even need that much space. It's not fair." The judge shook his head and said, "Need and fairness are not the same as legal entitlement. You cannot sue someone for simply having something you want." And just like that, it was over. The judge dismissed the case as entirely unfounded and absurd. My attorney asked for legal fees to be reimbursed, and the judge approved it. Vanessa stormed out of the courtroom without saying a word. Her kid trailed behind her, looking confused and embarrassed. I walked out of there not feeling triumphant, just exhausted. The entire thing had been unnecessary, petty, and emotionally draining. But I was relieved it was finally behind me. So after the court hearing, after the judge shut Vanessa down and dismissed her lawsuit entirely, something shifted in me. For years, I had been waiting for some kind of justice, some moment where someone in a position of authority would finally say out loud what I had always known, that I didn't owe Vanessa anything, that her sense of entitlement was completely out of touch with reality, and that my life was mine. And now it had happened. Vanessa left the courtroom with her head down, humiliated. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. She just walked out, clutching her purse with one hand and pulling her child behind her with the other. No dramatic exit. No parting words. Just silence. And that was the last time I ever saw her. There were no more texts. No more calls. No more pressure from extended family. It was like a switch had been flipped. She had tried everything. Emotional manipulation, guilt, public shaming, even the legal system, and none of it had worked. I think, in that moment, she finally realized that I wasn't going to bend anymore. That I wasn't the same person she used to bully, corner, and control. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. I stayed in my house. The one I paid for, cared for, and built a life inside. No one was going to take that from me. No one was going to make me feel guilty for having something I earned. I kept working, kept living, and slowly but surely, the tension that had been sitting on my shoulders for over 20 years started to lift. There was no big epiphany. No dramatic closure. Just quiet. Just peace. I didn't miss Vanessa. I didn't miss the chaos. I didn't miss pretending we had a relationship that never actually existed. I stopped looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next demand or accusation. I stopped explaining myself to people who were never on my side to begin with. I defended my boundaries. I stayed firm. And in doing so, I got something back that I didn't even realize I had lost: control over my own life.